This is our chat.
This is what
our
on earth
what
is
the
going
hell.
on. The Beebs
Yeah.
is in trouble. It's making headlines for all the wrong reasons.
Beeb. Okay. Yes, the BBC. All right. The BBC has been in the news recently, hasn't it? We're going to take a look at what's happening at the British Broadcasting Corporation. And before anyone says to me, but it's the British Broadcasting Corporation, why do we care? Obviously, not only is it massive, trusted by God knows how many people around the world.
The
but
most trusted, the most visited news site in the world.
There you go. Is it?
Yes,
Okay, there you go.
The most visited news site in the world in 1 month, about 1 billion visitors. So significant.
Yes, and often, when things happen in the United States and England, Britain, approximately 2 or 3 years later, they happen here. There's some kind of trickle-down cultural effect.
It's so funny because once we started talking about this, preparing for this show, and you said that, this usually comes here within 2 years. I was like, oh, that is like such a sort of colonial hangover view. No, it doesn't. Like, we can't say it happened there. It's going to happen here. And you said 2 years. 2 days later. I'm going to get to that in just a little bit about how some of that controversy has come to Australia. So let's get into it. I guess the biggest news, or what's dominating the headlines over the weekend, the BBC's Director General, Tim Davie, and the head of news, Deborah Turness, quit. And they quit after a 19-page letter, sometimes referred to as a dossier, but we don't believe it's a dossier. We think it's a long-ass letter, was sent to the board highlighting a number of incidents of alleged bias at the broadcaster.
It was written by a former journalist and kind of like external editorial advisor called Michael Prescott.
To the BBC.
To the BBC, yeah. His name's Michael Prescott. He was also the former advisor to the Conservative PM Theresa May. And he was political editor for the Sunday Times, which is a Murdoch-owned outlet, for 10 years, right? Like, that's his kind of background.
Yeah, so already when I hear that, I'm like, this. I have a feeling that I know what this letter's going to be.
Do you have a feeling?
It's a strong little, like, a gut feeling. A little bit of like reflux is coming up. I'm like, I know I'm gonna be served.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm like, okay, I'm still with you. Go on. So he split the letter into kind of like 4 categories of issues, I guess, or grievances, and these are his categories, not mine. US election, racial diversity, biological sex and gender, Israel-Hamas war.
So that reflex is like now making its way up my neck, right? And I'm just like, but yeah.
But like, what a Venn diagram. Like, you read that Venn diagram from the former political advisor to Theresa May and former journo for a Murdoch paper, and it's like,
yes, and this
interesting,
not a dossier, was published in full by the UK's Telegraph newspaper, which is also a conservative outlet.
Yes, yeah. So there's all of these things that just have that like tiny alarm bell going.
Yeah, I still try to go, okay, but let's look at the veracity of some of these examples. And I think it's important that we do that.
Yes, I think we should. So the main one is around Trump.
Yes.
And what he says in the letter is that the BBC Panorama Project, his word, doctored a speech by Donald Trump to kind of make it seem like he was calling for violence ahead of the January 6th riot on the Capitol, and that it was egregious because they had spliced together 2 separate bits of his speech.
Yeah, which they had, and I went and I had a listen. So this is a speech that he gave. The 2 sections of his speech were 50 minutes apart.
Those the 2 sections?
The 2 sections that this BBC Panorama episode had were very vast, in different sections of the speech.
Okay, all right.
Enormously different sections of the speech. Let's have a listen to the original compared to what actually ended up making it on air on the BBC. Because, I listened to that and I was like, oh, damn, that's unethical at the very least.
Okay.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. We're going to walk down.
Okay.
So before I play the second one, that's what made it to Panorama. See, the first section of we're going to walk down together and I'll be there with you. Then it cuts to a quick, we call that a cutaway, a quick show of the crowd. And then it picks up and then we fight like hell.
Right.
This is how it actually was in the speech, what he said after those words that I'm going to walk with you.
To the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
So this
What are
is
we forwarding?
Fast forwarding 50
And we fight.
minutes.
We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
I see. Okay.
So, I mean,
A bit off. Don't do that.
We understand that for brevity, as journalists, for brevity, and Trump rambles. He did say we're gonna walk together, and I'll walk there with you. We'll walk. I had a look at the entire transcript. He waffles.
Yeah.
But putting two, what I call a butt edit, putting two things together, usually what you would do for a visual medium, actually also for an audio one. For an audio, you'd have a whoosh, or you have a sound to indicate that they're two
time has
separate
passed.
parts.
Yeah.
Or for a visual one, we call it like a flash, like you put like a white flash or a dissolve or something to show that this has been edited. Marrying those two together sounded like he was completing his sentence. We're going to walk down and we're going to fight like hell.
The narrative that Trump incited violence or had something to do with the January 6th riots. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that his words and actions did. I don't think that they had to manipulate that particular part of his speech to show the public that. They could have relied a myriad ways to do it.
Yeah.
And truth be told, I have not watched the entire program, so I don't know where this fit in within the context of the show.
No,
or what else
neither have I. This was specific, specific to the particular speech. And it's not as though, yes, it's ethically questionable, but it's not as though this speech was the only bit of evidence or the only thing leading up to what then would be Trump's indictment. He was indicted in August 2023 on charges of working to overturn the election and for his contribution to the division and hate that helped fuel January 6th. And the case was delayed by appeals. Trump's lawyers had heaps of the details of the charges redacted, and ultimately a conservative majority Supreme Court said, well, he's presidentially exempt from it. So we never actually got to have all of the evidence played out in public. It wasn't just this speech. There was months and months in the lead up to this of undermining the electoral process and inciting division and hate, which led to the original indictment charges over the failed insurrection. So broadly speaking, the narrative of his role is correct.
The tampering of that particular speech
is not.
Yep. So this letter continues. I'm not going to go into too much of it, but I'm just going to kind of give you the vibe that I thought was a bit off, which was sort of rooted in this very kind of, questionable or cooked idea of balance, which often plays out as like a faux balance.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he said in the letter, this guy was like, critics of the Republican presidential candidate vastly outnumbered those who argued for him. And my first thought was like, but what if that's just a true reflection of the reality? Like, do you want us to find an equal amount of people who argue for him as argue against him? Like, what if 9 out of 10 argue against him and only 1 argues for him? Skewing that reality ends up obscuring the truth. Is that what you're asking us to do?
Especially at that point where there were Republicans, as he got more cray-cray trying to undermine the election,
there was a lot of people
distancing, and people were distancing from himself, going, this is actually an assault on our democratic institutions. Like, we are quietly stepping backwards.
Yeah, and then there was to go on. He says, given what I took to be the anti-Trump nature of the program, okay, you took that to be the anti-Trump nature of the program, I, of course, assumed there would be a similar balancing panorama program about Democrat presidential candidate Kamala Harris the following week. I remain shocked that there was not. Are you shocked? Are you really shocked? Like, can you not see that
they're different?
Like, not only are those two different, but Trump and literally everyone else is different.
Yeah, like, was Harris the first US president in history to be convicted of a crime?
No.
Did Kamala pay an adult entertainer hush money?
Does she speak disparagingly in the same way about migrants and threaten to build walls and then not build walls? And then did she get impeached? And, and so on and so forth. Like, there's so many scandals and moments that I've even forgotten about, that we've all forgotten about.
This one I enjoyed the most, though. The letter also said that there was an overemphasis on certain events, such as Mr. Trump's comments about Haitian migrants eating pets. Michael would have really liked if the BBC spent less time about Haitian migrants eating pets when Trump made those comments. Less Haitian migrants eating pets, please.
I mean, but this is
Please stop it. Balance it out. I mean, but did Harris talk about Haitian migrants eating pets? Like, this is just ridiculous. It's don't mention it. Please don't emphasize that too much. Or what does Kamala Harris think about cats? It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, but also like this is like the thing that the media really, I think, is having some kind of internal reckoning with, is that Trump says so many, like, frankly, that was a disgusting comment. And it was so out of the norm and so out of the ordinary. So the coverage of it is going to be out of the norm and out of the ordinary. It's just reflecting what Trump is doing and saying on the ground. So I'm not necessarily saying like that's the right way to do it, because I think you can then give credence to those comments more than they deserve.
Yeah,
but
and
it's
spend
like,
less time on policies and actual accountability,
but like,
and more
what's he suggesting should be done here? You know? So like moving slightly away from Trump, because as we said, it was not just about Trump. There was another bit where he says the LGBTQ desk has been captured, okay, that interesting word, by a small group of people promoting the Stonewall view of the debate. I read that in the piece and immediately my mind went to John Howard talking about the black armband view of history. You know, anytime we would talk about Australia and Indigenous rights and colonialism, he'd say, oh, well, you know, no, they just have a black armband view of history. And that became this kind of like dog whistle catch cry. So I'm like, is that what's going on here in this letter? Like, what is happening? And then he goes on to say there are too many stories celebrating the trans experience without adequate balance. So there's like that balance element again, which is like, what is the balance to celebrating trans people?
like, I don't know, like trans people hating themselves? Like,
Shitting on trans people? Like, is that what you want? You just want more stories shitting on trans people? Or like, what is the balance to celebrating a community? Because when you celebrate a community, you recognize, oh, these people are human.
yeah,
like,
but that
what's
they're
the
also,
balance
but
to
that
that?
there's also marginalized. Like, and sometimes when you celebrate a community or tell stories, it's because historically they have been
They have that,
marginalized
yeah.
and they don't have a voice.
And the other big point of the letter, and this is kind of the last thing that we'll touch on because I feel like we've talked about this memo a bit too much, but that BBC Arabic didn't have as many or even any stories about Israeli suffering
In a particular period.
in a particular period of time as what the BBC Main did. So he kind of, juxtaposed the two together and said when BBC Main had all of these stories, X, Y, and Z about Israeli hostages, Israeli suffering, the BBC Arabic did not mirror the BBC Main.
Yeah, so it says it is hard to conclude anything other than that BBC's Arabic story treatment was designed to minimize Israeli suffering and paint Israel as the aggressor.
But that point in time that you bring up is particularly important because I think it was between, he's talking June
2024.
and October 2024.
Yes, and in this time, Israel was the aggressor. Well, Israel was bombing 3 countries. It was bombing the shit out of Lebanon, and at one point in that period, 500 Lebanese were killed in a day.
Yes.
It was bombing Iran. It was bombing the shit out of Gaza. It was advancing its genocidal campaign in Gaza. Hundreds of thousands were displaced in Lebanon and in Palestine.
I mean, this was the period where we were like, is this a World War III?
No.
Is this what is happening here?
I remember absolutely thinking that and
Yeah.
having family living in the region going, I think we need to leave because now that Iran's being bombed and buzzed,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
someone's going to retaliate and this is going to be World War III.
Yeah.
So at that time, BBC Arabic, according to Michael, didn't have enough stories or didn't replicate the stories on BBC Main
Adequately.
about Israeli suffering. So a couple of things. I don't think that it's a translation service necessarily. It's not here to go, well, this is BBC Main and we just translate all of
it's
the
definitely not.
stories. And then maybe in that time, given the disproportionate amount of suffering and killings and murders and the fact that we're on the precipice, everyone thought of World War III, that in that 6-month period, maybe BBC Arabic thought, we've got a whole lot of other stories that Arabic speakers want.
That was not canvassed in the letter, but that sounds like something that could very well have happened, given what was going on at that point in time for Arabic speakers and viewers of the BBC.
What's interesting is the fallout from this and how this fallout was orchestrated.
Well, because the BBC would get complaint letters, I imagine, daily. I imagine quite a lot of complaint letters about all manner of things daily. So why did this one become a story? Okay, as you say, it was written by a particular person with a particular set of expertise. That's fine.
And more clout than the random
And
person.
more clout than the
Definitely
random
more clout than
person.
the
It also ended up in the Telegraph. And then the Telegraph, after kind of breaking this story, published a letter in full, had its journos and podcasters talk about it. There was even a podcast they did called Why Tim Davey Needs to Go.
Yeah, right.
So they had kind of ran with this story, but then ran with the line that this guy now needs to resign.
Yeah.
And even like the journalist who broke this story, like he was on YouTube going, I'm the journalist who broke this story. And frankly, we haven't even heard back from the BBC. Like they tried to milk as much content out of it as possible. It
Yeah.
was a kind of
and it's
a tentpole piece.
We know how these sorts of campaigns happen because then, next minute you've got conservatives jumping in, conservative politicians. You had the former British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. He appeared on the Telegraph's front page a couple of days later. He called for Tim Davie to explain or resign. And in his column the following day added in an ultimatum saying he would stop paying his BBC licence fees. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt labelled the corporation 100% fake news.
So it's gone across the Atlantic now very easily.
All these people saying defund the BBC, we don't need the BBC. I mean, I'd argue in this kind of political climate, you need a public broadcaster, an independent public broadcaster, one that's accountable, sure, more than ever.
Voila, you have the
And voila,
resignation.
we've got a campaign. You've got Trump unhappy, you've got conservatives unhappy, and you've got a couple of resignations.
And that's how you get them to resign. It's not really so much about the letter, but it's about all of the scaffolding that then gets built around the letter. And Deborah Turness, who was the CEO of News at the BBC, when she resigned, it was very telling that she said that one of the reasons was because the ongoing controversy around the panorama on Donald Trump has reached a stage where it is causing damage to the BBC. So that was one of her key reasons to leave, which is just that this controversy is not going anywhere. So if you can be part of an ecosystem that continues to manufacture the controversy, to keep it going, to do the follow-on stories, then you're much more likely to have an impact on the BBC and its personnel.
We see that happening with the ABC, with Sky News and the Australian, constantly whipping up controversy and campaigns and lots of articles, and then before you know it, you've got someone from the Nationals or Pauline Hanson or whatever chiming in, and you've got a controversy. You've got a manufactured controversy.
And speaking of manufactured controversies that reach our shores, I mean, I said when things happen in England, they come here 2 or 3 years later. I was being facetious because they arrive in a much shorter time frame.
Yes, this was hilarious because I don't know how I stumbled across it, but Sky News host Chris Kenny, there was a video saying that he exposes ABC committing the same journalistic sin as the BBC in doctoring footage of President Donald Trump. And firstly, lol, journalistic sin, like Chris Kenny calling out, or just Sky News in general calling out journalistic sin, or just being the gatekeepers of like good journalism was, I found lolly, very quite funny. Anyway, so they go to the same speech and they go to a Four Corners story around the same time as the panorama. And yes, Four Corners use the first sentence of the speeches. We're going to march down. We're going to blah, blah, blah.
I'll be there with you.
I'll be there with you. And then they go to the audience. There's a bigger gap. They go to the audience and he's like, cheering and this, that, and the other. But then when it comes back, it goes back to Trump's speech where he's saying, and we have to take back our country. You can never take back your country with weakness. But I went and had a look at the entire transcript. They cut out a few sentences in between.
Right, okay.
It wasn't 50 minutes later. It wasn't saying we fight like hell. And there was a long enough the music went up when they went to the crowd. You could tell that this was, here's a bit of his speech, here's the vibe, here's a little bit of his speech. It didn't alter the meaning, and it was only, and journalistically, as you would know, like cutting out, because Trump does waffle, cutting out a bit of stuff in between is okay.
Yes.
Absolutely is okay. It's not 50 minutes later, it's like, I don't know, 30 seconds later, not even.
Yes. And like I said, we have read the transcript and it was basically Trump repeating the points that he had already made that they had aired.
Yes.
So they really were just trying to truncate it and make sure that he kind of just kept on the direct and narrow path rather than deviating as he does.
So they're trying to, create the same thing. And I wonder if that article was repurposed or republished enough times, or that accusation, a couple of politicians weighed in. Trump tweeted something or went on Truth Social and said something, well, all of a sudden the ABC would be feeling the pressure.
That's the spark. It just needs to catch fire, right?
Exactly.
They'll just keep sparking.
Exactly.
And one of them will catch fire eventually. So that's the one thing.
Oh my God. So that's at one end of the spectrum. That's crazy, right? So that's at one end of the spectrum. One that's not getting as much airtime, A, because it's not about Donald Trump and it doesn't buy into culture wars. At the other end of the political spectrum, there's progressive independent journalist Owen Jones, who is getting sued by the BBC's Middle East editor for an investigation he did for an independent news outlet called Drop Site News, where he spoke to BBC staff, past and present, who allege there's widespread anti-Palestine bias.
Yes, there is a bit of background to this. In December 24, he wrote an investigation for Dropsite. It was called The BBC's Civil War on Gaza. Now, in it, he spoke to 13 current and former BBC journalists. Now, Owen Jones, for those who follow him, huge following. He's got, 630,000 followers on Insta, 813,000 followers on YouTube, very prolific. He's also a columnist for The Guardian, and he's been very critical of Western journalists and their responses and or silence about their colleagues in Gaza.
Yeah, and so the claims by these former or current staffers was that the BBC's coverage was credulous towards Israel, while, this I'm quoting, devaluing Palestinian life and also quoting, ignoring atrocities. The staffers said Rafi Berg, who's the BBC's Middle East editor, played a key role in such coverage. That's according to the story. The report alleges that Berg routinely rewrote headlines and text to reflect the Israeli military's perspective, often at the expense of Palestinian narratives. One former staffer told Jones, "This guy's entire job is to water down everything that's too critical of Israel." So following the piece, there were protests outside of BBC's offices, a petition demanding Berg's suspension, and Berg says a whole lot of, threatening abuse came his way.
Yes. And he also strongly denies the allegations that have been made by the current and former BBC staff that spoke to Owen Jones. He said he joined the BBC in 2001. He's overseen its kind of like online Middle East output for a decade. And what he is seeking is, damages for mental health and mental distress and reputation damage. And he wants the article removed from the internet. Owen Jones has issued this kind of counter statement, I suppose, where he says, "I strongly disagree with Mr. Berg's claims, and if necessary, I look forward to vigorously defending my reporting in court."
Yeah. And I remembered reading the article at the time, Jan. Do you, when it dropped?
I read it, yes.
Yeah. And at the top of the article, I remember this, Dropsite News was calling for donations from readers to fund any legal defense of the story because at the time it said when Jones reached out to Berg for comment, Berg at first hired the famous defamation lawyer Mark Lewis, who is also a former director of UK Lawyers for Israel. So this was at the time of publication in June 2024. They were already bracing for, because as soon as they sent questions, they got a letter back from this lawyer, or they say they got a letter back from this lawyer, Mark Lewis, former director of UK Lawyers for Israel. So they had been bracing. So we're now 11 months later bracing for a lawsuit, which has now been filed.
Okay. I don't remember reading that bit, but that is like.
I mean, I remember reading
somebody who runs an independent media outlet. Like, if I got a lawyer's letter, I'd be like, "All right, cool. Well, I'm shutting this whole operation down and moving to the Bahamas."
No, I just remember thinking they were like, "Here's the investigation's about to come," and at the top of the article they said,
Right, okay.
read this. We're going to defend this. And of course, I remember at the time because the group, he was the director of the UK Lawyers for Israel. I was in a federal court matter with a group called Lawyers for Israel as well. And I was like, good Lord. And so, yes, it obviously stuck out with me and I remember it. And then I just thought, oh, that went away. And then 11 months later, they filed in the court or whatever and the process is underway. But also at the time, in November 2024, so this is a month before this story came out, a month before these accusations, which Berg claims were defamatory, came out.
Yeah, and this is a separate thing, like an adjacent thing.
But like, so the climate at the time, the BBC was accused by more than 100 of its staff, the BBC broadly, in a petition of giving Israel favourable coverage in its reporting on Gaza and criticised for what they said a lack of accurate, evidence-based journalism. And so I just thought, okay, so that came out in November 2024, a general petition by BBC staff. This report comes out in December 2024. And then a few months later, there was some research from the Centre for Media Monitoring in the UK, which looked at which analysed the total number of BBC articles reporting deaths when they were Palestinian casualties compared to Israeli casualties. And during their 12-month analysis period, there were more than 42,000 Palestinians killed, more than 1,200 Israelis were killed. But it shows that Israeli deaths were given 33 times more coverage per fatality. So there's a whole lot of different kind of parts which are pointing to BBC bias against Palestine. What I find curious or interesting is there wasn't this kind of big campaign by legacy media outlets. There certainly weren't any resignations. There weren't any speeches of accountability and wanting to do better. What we have is a defamation lawsuit against Owen Jones.
Watch this space, man.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a bit sad to say. I'm a bit terrified to say. Like, I don't think this is the first or the last we're going to be hearing of accusations of bias in and around the BBC. And who knows? I think the charter is up for renewal. Is the other thing, which is the entire modus operandi of the BBC is going to be up for negotiation. I believe it's in 2027. And so 2026 seems like it's going to be a fractious year for all of the various parts of society that don't quite like the BBC. Anyway,